What is female nature? A lot of people claim to know the answer to that, or if they don't, it's a huge topic of discussion, right? Like, what are women actually thinking? I think it's actually pretty simple. And no surprise, I think the person who best articulates it is Nietzsche, except Nietzsche doesn't really understand women that well. He understands women from the context of power, which is a very masculine form of thinking. So I'm going to break it down as simply as possible, keep this video as simple as possible. So for Nietzsche, a great man is somebody who overcomes obstacles, right? Always does whatever, even willing to sacrifice himself to move humanity forward. So in the prologue of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, this is sort of epitomized in the rope dancer. So this guy who's going off along a tightrope, and it's a far fall if he falls, and he's taking that risk, and he ends up falling, and he dies. But Zarathustra says that that is an admirable man because he is trying to bridge the gap between beast and overman, aka the Ubermensch, and that uh, going across is an admirable thing, even though most likely you're going to fall and die. And that's really what it is to be a man, is to not be self-sacrificial for the sake of being self-sacrificial, because Nietzsche actually probably wouldn't like that, because you're usually doing that to preserve some form of morality, but more you're sacrificing yourself for something greater, right? That's why men go to war. They're willing to put their lives down for an idea. So, and I think the truth of where female nature is can be found in what Nietzsche admonishes in man, or says that is bad, which is the self-preservative instinct. Somebody who's willing to just do the bare minimum, just preserve themselves, just living for the sake of living and not trying to overcome things. And I think that's what women are, or that's what female nature is, because men can have that too, where it's a self-preservative instinct. And a lot of people hear that and say, like, well, men are the ones who want to overcome things. Women are the ones to just self-preserve. They automatically put a value judgment saying one is better than the other. I'm not saying that. I think both are necessary. It's like you saying hot weather is better than cold weather, or cold weather is better than hot weather. Like, no, both are just a thing, right? Subjectively, you might value one thing or another based off your temperament. And in our culture, especially our hustle culture in the West, we can't help but champion the overcoming instinct, right? Of saying that's better. But you can see this with societies past or just great men. A lot of times, if they don't have that sort of um, that warm energy, that warm feminine energy to temper them, they will destroy themselves with their own ambition. And so the feminine is there to sort of temper that overcoming instinct, to not strive for greatness so much that you end up destroying yourself and others around you in that pursuit, actually being able to live in the present. So Ralph Waldo Emerson says that greatness looks to the future. I think masculinity is our social construction of what men ought to be, which is striving for greatness. Societies need that, or else they're just going to stay stagnant and be outcompeted by other societies, right? So if that's the case, then masculinity looks, or greatness looks to the future, then so does masculinity. What looks to the present? I think that's femininity. And this explains too why women are so selective in their mate choices and men aren't, at least in terms of just sex, and that's it, right? They're willing to spread their seed. If they could, they'd probably bang as many girls as they can. But because of rules and limitations, they don't. Whereas women, they don't do that. That's not natural to them in general. They tend to be much more selective because the consequences of them taking those risks are way greater. The consequence of you as a guy is like nothing. Oh, you have a bunch of baby mamas, but and a bunch of bastard children, but you don't have to take care of them, right? A woman bears the physical consequences of that, thus forcing her to have more of a self-preservative instinct. And so, like most things, it's not that black or white or that simple. I think every human being has a mix of those two sort of temperaments: a temperament for greatness and a temperament for wellness, or this otherwise the self-preservative instinct. And so the key is to try to figure out what you are, how much of each you have, and be honest with yourself. It's I know it could be kind of maybe emasculating to be like a man and just think, "Oh, I have more of that self-preservative instinct," but that's not inherently a bad thing, right? Maybe you're like 70% wellness driven, aka the self-preservative instinct. I'm just gonna call it wellness from now on. That's what I'm calling in my book. Maybe you're 70% wellness driven, 30% greatness driven. Well, you're still striving for greatness with that 30%, right? You're still doing admirable things. And who's to say that you just preserving yourself and preserving the people around you and just making sure that they're okay, that that's bad, right? Like, okay, maybe it's not technically masculine, but it's still admirable, you know? And I think when people feel nihilistic, when people feel out of touch in their lives, it's because whatever their temperament is with greatness versus wellness, aka masculine versus feminine, let's say you're 70-30, then you're living the other way around potentially. We're living in a much more feminine world nowadays, which is why men are struggling more than women, although women are struggling too for different reasons. Our world is more decadent. There's less things to strive for. Everything is just all about self preservation, right? Especially with the shitty economy that we're in now. Everyone's just trying to preserve. And that's antithetical to reaching for greatness, which is the overcoming instinct that's natural in a man in his best state. And so I'll make another video about this, but I think what's good about this of just identifying what these things are is when women take the actions that they do, it makes a lot more sense. It's a lot easier to forgive them when they do something that seems sort of crazy or irrational. If you think about it from the standpoint of their main driving motivator as a feminine driven individual is the self-preservative instinct. They're not trying to strive for greatness like you might be. I remember my ex-girlfriend, she just couldn't understand this. I mean, she could, but her and I were having a discussion about how where we wanted to see ourselves in 10 years. And so for her, she just wanted to be like skiing. I'm sorry, she snowboards, snowboarding in the Rocky Mountains, just hanging out with friends and whatnot. And for me, I was like, I want to change the world with my ideas. And, you know, put aside whether that's realistic or not, I have that ambition, right? And for her, she didn't have that at all because she was in her feminine, I'm in my masculine, right? From that standpoint. And so if you start to see this, you'll start to see that most people have one of those two mindsets. With women, when they have that self-preservative instinct, they tend to actually be happier. They're not they're not miserable. And in the modern day, you see that they're pushed to strive for greatness more, right? Become a boss babe, and how many of those boss babes are actually happy? Not that many. Conversely, with men, um, we're taught to temper our masculinity, right? Toxic masculinity is bad. Um, don't be aggressive, right? S- uh, repress all of those things. Be civil, and you just become this docile creature. And how many men in that docile state are actually happy? Very few. Men are happy when they're competing. Men are happy when they're overcoming, right? It really is that simple. And then once you're able to understand that, then things like dating, things like interactions between men and women start to make a lot more sense. It's a lot and a lot clearer. So I hope that makes sense. I'll be talking about this more in my book. I'll keep this video short for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments as always. I'll see you tomorrow.